Today, the world faced yet another terrorist attack, this time in Bamako, the capital of Mali, where a number of gunmen stormed the Radisson Blu hotel, taking scores of hostages and leaving dozens dead. The gunmen took about 100 hostages at the beginning of the siege, according to General Didier Dacko of the Malian army. He said soldiers had sealed the perimeter and were inside looking for the terrorists. Now, this is earlier in the day. Unfortunately, a senior United Nations official said that as many as 27 people had been killed, with bodies found in the basement and on the second floor. Now, obviously, as the day progressed, they were able to track down. They believe that they've killed all of the gunmen, and they're looking for the possibility of more dead, unfortunately. So this might not be the end of it. But as I said in the intro, I mean, we can't go a single day, it seems like, this week. Yeah. I don't know if it's simply a coincidence. This is not ISIS, by the way. We're going to get to that in just a minute. That it's simply a terrible coincidence in terms of many things being planned for this week, or if groups are feeling some sort of bizarre, horrific need to copycat by moving up their plans or something to that effect. But another tragic day, this time in Africa, of course.
Right. Now, in this case, it wasn't, a random act of violence. It seems, based on the information that we have, that it was a targeted attack, specifically because at that moment there were diplomatic delegations between UN and French forces. They're trying to work together to figure out how they can prevent terrorist organizations from moving from the north part of Mali to the southern part of Mali. So obviously there was a target here. At least it seems obvious to me. But you have more information on that.
Yeah, in the hotel as well, it had a number of French nationals, Belgian nationals. I believe that there were 15 or 16 Americans as well. We don't know what the breakdown is in terms of those who unfortunately died that day. But as I said, it turns out that this is not ISIS. At least that's the way it looks right now. Al-Qaeda supporters quickly praised the attack on Friday, with one even saying that the Islamic State should learn a thing or two, reflecting the rivalry between the two groups. That's the sort of rivalry we do not want.
So I don't understand that. So I thought that Al-Qaeda broke off from ISIS because ISIS was even too brutal for Al-Qaeda.
That's one of the sort of narratives that came out during that, yes.
So was that Al-Qaeda telling ISIS that you guys don't even know how to do an attack in a hotel correctly? Is that what that is?
I don't know.
I don't know what that is either.
And of course, we're trying to make sense out of these crazy people who...
Right.
And we know that there have already been multiple attacks on hotels. I mean, look, we're talking about a rivalry between two different groups of insane people, basically. So it's hard to understand exactly what the message they're trying to... I mean, they're looking for donations and supporters to join their cause. And they're doing crazy things to get it and saying crazy things to cause it to happen.
Now, ISIS wants to draw the West into boots-on-the-ground conflict. They want to have a religious war, the West against... That's what's believed, yes. That's what the ISIS wants, right? So that's what all the experts say. So are these Islamists, they want that same thing? Are they trying to draw
Originally, it seemed like Al-Qaeda, their driving goal going from the 90s into the early 2000s was to cause America to disassociate with Saudi Arabia, to pull all of our forces and our support for some of the dictatorships that were anti-Islamic in the region. Now, at some point, it seemed like they wanted to do damage to us, sort of a war of attrition, and drawing us in at that point seemed like the best way to do that. And certainly we did spend a ridiculous amount of money. Thousands of American soldiers died in the Middle East. But originally it was to get us out of that area. ISIS, of course, wants a caliphate, and so eventually they will want to actually have that territory without American or Russian forces or whatever nearby. But now it does seem like they want an ongoing conflict, either locally there or worldwide.
So now the reason, everybody's talking about we have to destroy ISIS, we have to crush them, but the reason why they're never going to go away, correct me if I'm wrong, is because they're financed by Saudi Arabia.
ISIS?
Yeah.
I mean, Russia recently released a report saying that up to 20 countries were currently financing ISIS. But when you say that, I mean, does that mean that the government is financing or the individuals from the country are financing? It's obviously a mixture. I mean, the Saudi Arabian government, at least formally, has no interest in it. They've already experienced a little bit of ISIS violence inside of Saudi Arabia. And there's an expectation that there will be far more. But that doesn't mean that there aren't elements of the Saudi government or royal family or whatever that might support it.
Yeah, okay.
And they're receiving funding both through outside donors like Al-Qaeda. That was always their model for Al-Qaeda, was getting those big donors. But ISIS has a slightly different model in that they are actually taking money from the areas they control through resources, oil, farming, taxation, things like that. So it's a little bit different too.
I often make the point, people say, well, what should we do now? Should we close the borders? How do we respond? I'm like, well, why don't we stop drone bombing wedding parties just for starters? Just see how that goes.
To test it.
Let's see
for a year.
Yeah, let's see if that works, and then we'll try. I don't know. So that's a.
So when you say that, people have like a very negative reaction to it because they make it seem as though you're making terrorists seem like victims.
Yeah, no.
But that's not what Jimmy is saying, and that's not what we advocate for on the show at all. The argument is that terrorist organizations like ISIS or Al Qaeda have a much easier time recruiting Muslims when they've been victims of drone strikes. So. Perfect example of that, let's say the Doctors Without Borders, that wasn't a drone strike, but that bombing that killed 22 innocent people that have nothing to do with terrorism whatsoever. And then if you do one of those, drone strikes at a wedding and you kill all these innocent civilians, well, then the U.S. government refers to those innocent civilians as collateral damage, right? Which is beyond insulting, to say the least, to these people. And so all of a sudden, these moderate Muslims might look at a situation like that. These people who probably had no interest in being violent, they might look at a situation like that and say, you know what, I want vengeance. And it's much easier for ISIS to recruit people if we continue this foreign policy that we have right now. It's not working. We need to come up with a better solution.
Yeah. So when Osama bin Laden did the 9/11 attacks, he was hoping that America would overreach, and which we have. So we went into Iraq, not only Afghanistan, but Iraq, which was our overreach, and we're still in Afghanistan, right? We just didn't go in there and kill Osama bin Laden, which we already killed him, right? And we already wiped the Al-Qaeda out in Afghanistan. There was maybe 18 people left. So we're still doing, so we are overreaching. So that's the test here, is to not overreach. And let's remember that although everybody's scared of refugees here in America, France already just allowed 30,000 more in.
Yeah.
So the people who were attacked aren't freaking out as much as the right-wing people here in America.
Exactly. Yeah, they're still going to allow the Syrian refugees in because the French might have sort of realized that the attackers in Paris were not Syrian refugees. And so that wasn't a good reason to bar them. And look, a lot of people in America will say, well, like when we do those accidental bombings, like they should just understand it's part of the war effort. As if, like, imagine if, so the FBI released the pictures of the Virginian men who were going to bomb the black churches to start a race war. And imagine if Obama, like, instead of sending in the FBI, if he just started bombing with drones Charleston and wherever, and like a bunch of redneck weddings got blown up. Well, it's just part of the war effort. Like, do we really think that we wouldn't freak out here?
Right.
And you would then think, well, we should be empathic and understand that our horror at that sort of violence here is probably going to be similar to their horror there. But unfortunately, the sort of people that we're talking about don't think of them as the same sort of people.
Yes.
Right.
And so people have also asked me, they go, well, how come there aren't Vietnamese terrorists? We bomb them. How come there aren't El Salvadorian terrorists? We bomb them. How come there aren't Brazilian terrorists? And I'm like, so your argument is, hey, how come the rest of the world just doesn't take it? And not fight back when we bomb them. But the reason is, my reason was...
Are we launching drone strikes in Brazil right now?
No, but we have overthrown governments in Brazil,
course,
right? At behest of corporations, right?
Yeah.
General Smedley Butler and War is a Racket in 1935 told us all about that, and the Banana Wars. And we've been suppressing poor people in South America ever since we could, right? At the behest of corporations. And we do that, and it's a state policy.
There were terrorist attacks in South America because of that, South and Latin America.
Right, but they don't come here. And my answer was, they go, why don't there terrorists coming here? And I'm like, well, maybe if they had a oil-rich nation that was also funding them, there would be more terrorists. But they don't have an oil-rich nation funding them.
Yeah, perhaps. Now, one of the most tragic things about this attack in Mali specifically is they have had many terrorist attacks recently. It's a combination of both an ongoing conflict against radical Islam in Mali and an ongoing civil struggle. And so when you combine those things, the violence is ongoing. And here's a quote from the president. President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta of Mali says, "We don't want to scare our people, but we have already said that Mali will have to get used to situations like this. We must all remain humble. No one, nowhere is safe given the danger of terrorism." Now, that seems like an incredibly realistic quote to deliver in that context, considering that they have been trying to stop this, but the violence is ongoing. But it's the sort of thing that, like, can you imagine if our president said something like that? As accurate, as true, and as honest as it would be, they're being a little bit more honest with their own citizens abroad.
I've also been trying to tell people that, these guys who committed these attacks in France, they're murderers, right? And when we change how we act as a society is when we can turn murderers into terrorists. Yeah. So if they actually have an effect on the way we live our lives, then we're living in terror. But if we don't let them affect us, and we go on with our life, then they're just murderers.
Yeah.
I feel like human nature gets exploited in situations like this. And human nature is to see these types of terrorist attacks, get really scared, and then want immediate and severe vengeance, right? And when you allow fear to determine your actions, usually the results of those actions don't work out the way you want them to.
Yeah.
Right? So, immediately after the attacks in France, the NSA comes out and several politicians come out and say, you know what, we need to make sure that we continue spying on Americans indiscriminately to keep us safe.
Yeah.
But the NSA has been spying on us indiscriminately. It hasn't changed anything. We can't willy-nilly let go of our constitutional rights and our freedoms in the name of fear and in the name of national security.
Yeah.
Because again, human nature is being exploited after situations like this so politicians can get what they want. And they get what they want in terms of spying on us. They get what they want in terms of continuing this perpetual war, right?
Yeah.
So we got to think smarter and come up with better solutions to deal with these instances. Because I don't want this to continue happening. I want to stop this. I want to conquer this. I want to put an end to this. But at the same time, what we've been doing has not been working.
Has not been working. And there are politicians saying we should do more of the same.